Okay, so also to all the viewers who just see the recording, welcome to the fourth and final session of Knowledge Management for Beginners. Wesley, can we start the screen sharing?
Okay. This one?
Yes. Is it? Yeah. Let's try that one. And yeah. So as I mentioned, maybe we give it one click forward. Yes, so as I mentioned, today we're going to look at, for one, documentation. Then we're going to have a small question parking lot. Remember last session, I invited everyone to bring questions that you still have so that we can answer them today. If you haven't sent in questions, but you still have something, you can still pose the question throughout this session, and then we see if we can answer that question immediately. And then finally, we want to take some time to reflect on this webinar and to hear back from you how the experience has been. I pointed out in the very beginning that this is sort of the first of its kind that we are doing here in East Africa. So it would be great if you can help us reflect on how the experience has been and how maybe we can improve it in the future. So let's start out with documentation. Please give it a click. Yes. So documentation is basically the handling of explicit knowledge, the preparation or the management of documents. If you think of one example where this is happening, it's a library. So a library has a very clear order to make books or the knowledge that's inside the books accessible to a wider audience. And you usually have also a librarian that helps manage that library, so that when you enter a library, you know where to find something. So, or you can have an access point where someone can explain where you can find it, and it is very clearly managed. Now, what we want to do in this very brief presentation about documentation is sort of to walk you through some of the things to consider as you build your own document library, and then also how to maintain it. And this is a very crucial part because we have covered sort of the chunk of the iceberg, if you remember the knowledge management of the knowledge iceberg with that huge part under the water. And now we're also looking at how you manage the part that is explicit, the part that we see outside of the water. And this is very relevant because having a huge room full of books isn't a library, because you will be struggling to access the information that is in the books, because you would have to check through every single book if there's no order through it. So when you start doing your documentation, there are some things you should put into consideration. Wesley, can you please go to the next slide? So the first question that you have to really look at is what needs documentation? And selection is so very important because it helps you leave out information that will not be useful to you. And having a lot of useless information can be completely overwhelming. So amassing documents just for the sake of keeping them is not very helpful. So some of the things that you can, or some of the questions you can ask yourself when you think of what are the documents that we want to keep, what are the things that we want to write down, note down in whichever form, can be, for one, what is relevant to achieve your strategic goals? So what is relevant for your organization to keep? What do you need to write down and keep for the future or for accountability? And that leads us to the next question. What is the purpose of the document? It's important to keep in mind what the document is supposed to do. So is it supposed to deliver accountability? Is it supposed to help in the sharing of knowledge, either internally or externally? Is it supposed to improve internal procedures? So the purposes of the document can, of course, be overlapping, but you should try to think what is this document going to do, and very importantly, who will use this information? I think we have mentioned this before in the experience capitalization, to think about who will be the end user of this. And in your documentation, this is also very important. So who needs to have access to this information, and what kind of access do they need? And a person that needs the access could be either another staff, it could be your donor, it could be another stakeholder outside the organization, a peer organization, or it could even be your future self. I think that's something we should also keep in mind, that in the moment, we always think that we know exactly why we're taking which decision, we know where everything is, But if we fast forward 6 months from now or a year from now, it might be less clear why you chose one thing over the other. And documenting can help you keep track of what you were doing. So it can also help your own future self. If we think of documents or types of documents that you can save, we have the reports, we have budgets, but we also have participant lists, or we have contacts or meeting minutes. So such can all be things that you can document, that you can write down to keep track of what you have been doing. All right, so that's the first step, knowing what you want to document. And then let's go to the next slide. The question is, how do you document? And I would like you to go to the market with me and think through the market as an example. So a market is a central place where produce is collected, meaning you as a person, as a buyer who goes to the market, you don't have to go to every farmer in the area to buy your tomatoes from this one, your potatoes from that one. You can all find it in one central place. And transferring this one central place to documentation means having a central storage place. Can we move to the next slide? So a central storage place, there are different options out there, but what it actually does, it gives access to information for all staff, or for everyone that you grant access to this central storage place. Meaning you have sort of your market of documents where everybody can go and pick what they need for their work. Also, a central storage can make it easy to back up your data, and we will talk about backup in a minute. And it can also be a place where you can collaborate with each other. Instead of sending documents back and forth via email or passing them through flash drives, you have a central place where you can put them and work together on them. Now, I can't go into all the details of the options because, frankly, I'm not an IT expert, and I would highly recommend that if you're thinking of putting a central storage, you really carefully consider the options, and if need be, you also get an IT expert to advise what in your particular case makes sense. The case being, how do you want to use it? What do you need it for? How big are we talking? How many data do you have? And then also, how much money do you have? How much resources do you have to invest in this? But let's briefly consider some options. So a very common option is a server. So a server is basically another computer which is running a particular software that is providing that space where everybody can put their data. It basically looks almost like your Explorer on your normal computer, but it's accessible by very many different users. And the server can also offer other things. It can offer you a firewall, etc., etc. So it has quite some possibilities. The downside of servers is, for one, the maintenance is a little bit more complicated. So it might be that you at least have some IT person that can come in and troubleshoot. Plus, a server can be quite expensive, especially if you choose the latest version and the high-end versions. Another cheaper option is a network attached storage, or short, a NAS. And a NAS is basically a hard drive that also has a software where you can exchange files. So it's a little bit similar to a server, but it doesn't offer all that a server can offer you. And the space is more limited, and I think also the amount of users a NAS can easily take is more limited. Both the server and the NAS can also be created with remote access, meaning that if someone is not in office, they would still have the chance to access the information on the server. This comes with some security questions, though, in terms of how secure are your internet connections. So that is something to definitely consider when you maybe have sensitive data that you don't want cyber criminals to access, for instance. Then another thing are the cloud services. That's the last one I'd like to point out. So there are different cloud services. There's the Microsoft OneDrive, there's the Google Workspace, there's Amazon, there's from Apple. So there are very many different solutions out there. And their advantage is that everything is saved in a different location, meaning it's not in your office. So whether there be theft, a break-in, fire, your information is on another server, most likely even in another country. So they guarantee more or less that your information is safe. So that can be very attractive. And also they come with certain collaboration tools where you can even have direct collaboration, meaning I can work on a document and you sitting in Kenya, in the USA or wherever can also work on the document. So this can be very great if you have many people working on a document. However, the cloud works through the internet, meaning if you struggle with the internet connection, this might not be the best option. And then also it can be quite expensive because most of these services charge per user per month, meaning then you would really have to calculate how much of your budget can you allocate for this, also planning not just for a few months, but for the long time. So whenever you set up something like a central storage location, you should think long term. You should not think this year or this project, but you should think for a longer future. Okay, let's go back to our market, and Wesley, please click to the next slide. Another thing I'd like to point out with the market is if you look at this stall, you can see that the tomatoes are where the tomatoes are. You can see the onions are sitting next to the onions. The potatoes are where the potatoes are. And sorry, Wesley, I think the screen went off. But I think we are still on, so let me continue. So you can see the produce of one type are sitting together. So the potatoes are with the potatoes. And that is an ordering principle already. So when we think of order, it doesn't